everyone, and welcome to the end of another month and another book vlog. It's a pretty cool day here in Adelaide. I think we're about 13 degrees at the moment, so I'm a little bit rugged up. I would say it does tend to feel colder here in Australia than it did when I lived in England. Although the temperature's colder, we have a much smaller gap between the summer and winter temperatures. Whereas over here, you know, our summer days are over the 40s sometimes. And that's Celsius for the Americans watching, 40 degrees Celsius. So when it drops down to sort of around 10 here, it's a big drop, big difference. We really feel it. Anyway, I'll keep warm by talking about some books. So I'm pretty much back on track with my Goodreads goal. I'm one ahead at the moment. I do want to try and pull a bit further ahead because towards the end of the year I've got a few things happening, my sister's wedding, and it might affect how much reading time I have. So if possible, I want to try and get a little bit ahead so that I can allow for reading a bit less during that month or so. Now, starting off today, it's a bit of a mix this week, or this month, sorry. Got a few here, ranging from 3 to 5 stars, and a real mix of genres, and I've got quite a lot of print ones this month, because I noticed that my print pile was getting a little bit out of control, so I wanted to knock out a few of those. It's now led to the opposite situation though, because I've suddenly had about 5 or 6 NetGalley ones approved all within the last week or so. So once I finish the one I've just started in print, I'll have to go back to ebooks for a while and catch up with those again. But it's been good anyway to get the pile down, so when I walk into my library and see it sitting there, it's not quite so heartbreaking. Anyway, without further ado, let's move on. So the first books I read for this month were the 2 graphic novels based on the TV series Heroes. So got one of them there. The cover's quite pretty, so let's give you a bit of a close-up of that. The second volume, the cover was a bit more average, so we'll put that one aside. It's not as pretty. For those of you that know the show, I've only come to it very recently. I think about January, February. I discovered it on Netflix and started watching, having never seen it when it originally aired. I'm now a huge fan, as you'll see from my reading list today. And for those that don't know, the graphic novels, or webcomics really, were released in between episodes when the TV show originally aired. So it was kind of like filling in little bits of the story, backstory on some characters, what happened to some minor characters before or after we see them in the series. And they were all available for free online originally. Then they started binding them in the books. However, they only got as far as partway through season 2 webcomics when the show was cancelled, wasn't picked up for the 5th series, and they didn't bother binding and selling the rest. So this is just like I think about the first 70 or so. Don't know if it tells me here. Yeah, 35 through 80 in the second volume. But there were 172, 73. So you can find them online. I have managed it. It took a bit of searching, but I've managed to read them all. In any case, I gave these books 5 stars. I don't read a lot of graphic novels and webcomics, but they're pretty nicely done, and it was really nice to see how the characters progressed in their own little stories, the ones that we didn't really spend a lot of screen time with. So that's those. Moving on, and sticking with the graphic theme for the moment, I also finally got around to completing my Vampire Night book collection with the official fan book. So this one's quite sweet. It's got some, I'll find a pretty one to show you. It's got some nice illustrations in it as well. It's kind of an overview of the series, so it's got little character profiles and bits and pieces like that. So it's not really a reading book, but it's just more of a memento of the manga and the anime. So that one I gave 4 stars too. It's a nice companion book, but nothing really amazing. Next up, we're back to Heroes. I pretty much went and just bought all the available books related to Heroes with some money I got for Easter. So there's a bit of a Heroes rush. So this one is the sort of official guide to the series. It did come out though at around series 2, end of series 2 I think. So it's quite interesting to see how they speak about some of the characters when they're profiling them in this book, because some of the things they say about them don't make sense with what happens in later series. But even so, it's a really nice memento from the series. Again, like nicely illustrated. Look, Sawyer there. He's my favourite. That's where you get a picture of him. Some nice behind the scenes info. Some nice interviews. I keep saying nice too much in this video. Sorry. Nice, nice, nice. I'm a writer. I shouldn't be saying nice ever. But a good book to conclude. 5 stars. Again, a great companion to the series. Moving on with Heroes still. I might as well just finish all the print ones and then come back to the ebooks. There are the novelizations. So initially we have Saving Charlie. Now this one is from relates to the original 4 seasons. It came out, I think, I've got a feeling it came out around season 2 or 3. Yes, so it doesn't allow for some of the stuff that happened in later series. This was okay. I think I gave it a 3. Yes, I gave it 3 stars. It was okay, but it just wasn't that well written. It felt like YA before YA became a good genre, if you know what I mean. Like books written for sort of older children, but before it really became at the point where writing was good and adults read them too. I'm not explaining that very well, but I mean, I'm thinking of things like The Vampire Diaries, which as a sort of child, when I was about 10 or so, I think I read those and loved them, and I reread them when the TV series started, and I was so disappointed because I had these great memories of them, but the writing was pretty mediocre. So it kind of reminds me of that in a way. It was a bit puerile at times. Hero just became this soppy, lovesick puppy. You kind of wanted a bit more action and them to use their powers a bit more. But even so, just as a memento of the show, go with 3 stars. Then we come on to these novelizations, or novellas I should say really, that relate to Heroes Reborn, which was the reboot series that came out last year. I have watched it. It was okay, but I don't think it really had the magic of the original, partly because the characters just didn't connect with me as much. I mean, Noah Bennett being there was really the only thing that held it together for me. You had odd appearances from Hero and Matt Parkman, but the new characters, I just didn't relate to them in the way I instantly connected with people like Peter and Silo and Claire in the original. But still, I thought, well, I'll read these novelizations. I started the first one. We've got 2 volumes of them here, 6 novellas in all. I started the first one, and I was a bit confused because I'd thought they were going to be in-between stories, a bit like those webcomics used to be. But the first novella really just seemed to be rehashing the first episode or so. However, once we got to the second story, it did change, and we got a nice backstory for one of the characters. That was my favourite one. For those who know the show, Father Maurizio, or Maurizio, I can't remember how they pronounce it. And that's his backstory, how he ended up becoming a priest, how he discovered his powers. So that was really good. In the second book, the stories I think I liked more overall than in the first book. Again, the second story was my favourite, and that was told from Claire's point of view, and it kind of filled in some of the gaps between what happened at the end of series 4 of the original to where we pick up in Heroes Reborn, which I enjoyed. A very brief little appearance and a few mentions for Sila, and at least something that explains where Peter and Sila are, because that was one of the weaknesses I thought in the new series, that Peter and Sila were key characters, and yet we got one vague mention, I think, of each of them, and that was it. And it made you wonder where the hell they were. I mean, there's this world-destroying event about to take place. Where's Peter Petrelli? It's the sort of thing that he would really rock up for, even if he had no powers, couldn't really do anything. He'd still be there trying to help. So why wasn't he? So at least this kind of showed that he was in the background, he was doing something, working with Hero Truther, and Sila was sort of with him, but did his own thing a bit. So That at least I thought filled in that gap a tiny bit. So those novels I gave 4 stars each, or novellas. Some stories I liked more than others, but again they did fill in some gaps quite effectively. And the final print book for this month is Their Finest by Lissa Evans. Now this one I actually won in a giveaway from the cinema. I went and saw the film at the cinema, and then later they had the giveaway to win some of the books, which I entered and was successful. So I really enjoyed the film, and I was interested to see what the story would be like in its original print form. And I liked it. I mean, the same as the film, it's a kind of bittersweet story. There's moments of light humour, but then at the same time there's quite poignant moments. It's not a conventional happy ending, although it's not miserable. I gave it 4 stars. It was quite interesting with this one to see how it differed from the film. There's secondary plot lines that they just ignored in the film, they didn't bother with, which was a good thing because they're concentrating on the main storyline. But because they'd cut some of those things, I quite liked the way they got around it, because in the book, Katrin and Ambrose's characters don't really intermingle much. His revelations come about from his relationship with this dog. It sounds weird, but just bear with me. Whereas in the film, because they didn't really pursue those separate storylines as much, they brought them together. So you got more interaction between Ambrose and Katrin. And I thought that worked really well, actually. I was waiting for it to happen in the book, and when it didn't, that was a slight disappointment. However, you sort of accept that I could understand why they'd changed it for the film, because they'd cut these other bits out. Overall, though, I'd say it's a pretty decent adaptation. If you haven't seen the film, it's worth seeing. So that was that one, 4 stars. So I've got my bullet journal here with a note of the other ones I read, so I'll just whiz through them and talk about those a bit. So in ebooks, the first one, all of these I think were from NetGalley. Yes, all from NetGalley. So the first one was The Other La Boheme by Yorka Keith. This was a story around a quartet of opera singers who are about to perform in La Boheme, but not the Puccini one, the one by, I think it's Leoncavalli. And it's kind of like life mirroring art in a way, because they all have their own relationship issues going on that are similar to those of the characters, Mimi and Rodolfo in La Boheme. Overall, it was enjoyable. I gave it 3 stars. I just didn't connect with the characters as much as I would have liked to. I was kind of found myself skimming through, seeing what was going to happen, but I never really had that emotional connection with any of the leads. The next one I read was The Indigo Girl by Natasha Boyd. Now this one is based on a true story about this young woman whose father has to go off. He's in the military. It's set during the 7 Years' War. Yes, 7 Years' War. Or beginning of the American Revolution. Oh my goodness. I read it at the start of the month. Around that period anyway, 18th century. They weren't that far between the two of them. So she's left alone and ends up having to run the plantation while he's gone, and she faces various trials, and she decides to plant a crop of indigo, which was a very profitable crop at the time, but very difficult to grow and process. I would say the processing was the hardest, and some of the slaves knew the process. And so it's her trials and tribulations, whether she's going to succeed. And I don't want to give it away by saying whether she does or not, but I'll leave it to you to read. But very enjoyable book, 4.5 stars. I really loved the writing style, the characters came across well, beautiful pacing, and it certainly made me interested in what this young woman had achieved, considering that it is a true story. Next I read Gather the Daughters by Jennie Melamed. Now, this one is kind of a story about a cult. A group of people a few generations ago had broken away from society and moved to this island and basically lived under their own laws. And children, or women I should say, married the moment they started menstruating, became women. But until that time, in the summer, they were allowed to run free in the forest. But after that, they had their summer of fruition, and they're paired off with the men, and that's the end of that. They just live as housewives. And so this is a group of girls who one summer, some of them are on the cusp of adulthood, and something goes wrong. There's a death, an unusual death, and some of the girls start to question the hierarchy, the authority of what's going on. So it's kind of around their struggles. It's told from the viewpoint of various different girls, all with different opinions about what's happening, which I really enjoyed. I gave this one 4 stars again. It's well written, nicely paced. The story interested me, and it held my attention from start to finish. The only reason it got a 4 and not a 5 really, or 4.5, was the ending felt a bit of a letdown to me. I'd expected something, I guess, a little more spectacular than what actually happened. So moving on, we've got 2 left. So Rebel by Cheryl Sawyer. I've read some of Cheryl Sawyer's other books. She writes historical fiction. A lot of her fiction is set around the Civil War and through to the 18th century, so 17th, 18th century. Most of her works are set in. This one was an American Revolution one, which makes me think I was correct about the 7 Years' War before, but we'll see. I'll maybe put a note in the comments in a minute when I put the video up and just confirm the time period for the Indigo Girl. But anyway, back to Rebel. 4-star read, set during the War of Independence, or American Revolution, however you wish to call it. And it's about a French woman who is friends with a group of people that include Lafayette. And so she ends up going over to America, and she wants to help him bring him freedom. However, she's got this antagonist in the form of her uncle. Her father's died, so her uncle, who's an adopted son, not a legitimate bloodline, he's inherited the estate and is her guardian, and so she has lots of clashes with him. However, there's sort of this other tension between them as well. I enjoy Cheryl Sawyer's writing. Her historical details are always very good. Her characters always come across well presented, well rounded, believable. In this story, I mean, it's pretty obvious where it's going with this relationship between the two of them from the start. However, that didn't spoil my enjoyment of the story overall. So, finally, Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth Emmie Lang. Now, this is a 5-star read for me. Really great story. Magical realism, so if you liked books like The Night Circus, Water for Elephants, then this would be a read for you. It's about a boy who grows up with wolves, and then he's discovered and taken to live in this family, but there's always something a bit different about him, and there's queries about whether he can control the weather and whether he can talk to animals, and the story is told from the viewpoint of people that meet him at different stages of his life, and finally with his own viewpoint as well to end. A gorgeous read, so delightful, every page really. I was always eager to discover what was going to happen next. Magical realism was beautifully handled to the point where you weren't thinking, is this possible, is this not possible? You just accepted that this is how he was. So definitely a highly recommended read if you like that style of novel. And I think that brings us to the end for this month. So I'm about to start one called Anno Dracula by Kim Newman, which was a gift from a friend of mine who'd finished it and wanted to know if I fancied giving it a try. So I'll read that one next, and after that I will be getting back to some NetGalley reads for the rest of June to get caught up on the ebook pile again now that I've cleared a bit off the print. So that's all from me for today. So I say goodbye for now, and I will see you in 4 or 5 weeks' time with a few more books to recommend. Bye for now.